Hello, welcome. I'm Hannah, and today we are talking about the Kaleidos Escape Pod palette. I've had this palette for a couple months now, I think about 6 months. I did a first impression video when I first got it. It had been long anticipated in my collection. I was always lusting after it, and I never pulled the trigger and actually got it until earlier this year. In that video, I wasn't so sure about my feelings about it. I was left feeling a little bit disappointed, and in the months that followed that, I found myself just not reaching for this palette. So I figured we should come back and reconsider this palette, try to get to the bottom of it once and for all if I like it. So we're approaching that a couple different ways today. I did build a single shadow palette of comparable shadows to this. Later on in the video, I will show you all of that and apply one of each to my eyes. You can cast your guess now about which side is the Kaleidos side and which side is the single shadow side. Before we get into all the single shadow fun, I did challenge myself to use every shade in this palette to try to make looks and see how I felt. So we're first going to switch over to some footage of me talking through some recent looks I've created. Today was my first time opening this up since filming with it, and actually posting the video a couple days ago is what inspired me to use it today. I really wanted to get Starlight Sonata on my lids. That's one of the shadows I was most excited about trying. So I decided to just do a neutral look, not try to do too much, which I do sometimes when I know I'm going to be talking about it on camera. And I started out with Lo-Fi in my crease, which is light enough to kind of work as a peachy crease color, but it also feels very bright based and neon. It doesn't feel like it blends in with my skin that well. It feels like it kind of sits on top like a pastel shadow does. And then I deepen it up with Bossa Nova. This shadow is so cool toned though. Maybe for some people that would be a selling point, but I love a warm toned crease. So I used it, but didn't love it. And then I used Terrace to deepen up the outer V. This is such a big step deeper than Bossa Nova. I didn't feel like they went together that well. And it took more blending that I like to get it blended, and I still don't think it looks very good. I love mattes that kind of blend themselves, and I find that I have enough of them that I don't have the patience for mattes that take extra work. So I didn't enjoy working with these mattes. I think Starlight Sonata does look pretty on my lids. It looks sparkly, but I have so many indie neutral shadows that are beautiful and sparkly but have more nuance to them that this shadow, although I love the tone of it and the finish of it, it's just not very exciting. And overall, this look to me feels like something I would wear going out in 2014. You know, it doesn't feel like me now. To be thorough, I used Divina Pancake Bubbles on my inner corner, which I feel like I could have used all over my lid in place of Starlight Sonata. I don't know. So second impression using this, still not sold. This is my second Kaleidos look, and I used 4 shades from the palette as well as 2 shades not from the palette. So I started off with Bossa Nova in the crease, and then I used Terrace, the dark brown, on the outer part of it. For the lid, I used the lighter green on the inner half and the slightly darker green on the rest of it. So Galactic Gala was first, and then Saturnalia was in the middle. Both of these greens, I think, are too similar to each other, and I don't think anyone could really tell that there's 2 greens on my lid. At the same time though, I do think the finish of them is nice, and I think that's the thing that I like the most of this look, but I still think it's probably dupeable within my collection. For my lower lash line, I went in with Meadow from Sydney Grace, just because I wasn't really inspired to use this palette for it. I didn't want to use a shimmer. I'm not sure how these shimmers work on a brush or my lower lash line, but I didn't feel like messing around with it, and the only other option I would have had to really match the look would have been just to go down with the neutrals, and that seemed a little bit more boring. I think either one of these green shimmers could have been a matte, or one of these orange shimmers could have been a green matte. I think that while the color story looks cute in theory, in use, it just feels a little bit like, what am I supposed to do with this green? And then for my inner corner, I used Chandelier from Cliona. So overall, I like the look, but do I think I could get it with my singles? Yes. Sorry for the jump scare, but I have to check in like this because this look is being abandoned. I realized I hadn't used the oranges in this palette for any looks for this video yet, so that was my agenda today. So I started with Lo-Fi in the crease, which is very light, very whitish, and not a big fan of. And then I realized that both oranges swatch pretty similarly on my hand, so I figured I would do one eye with each and really try to see the difference. So I did Tango on this eye. And my first impression when I went in was that it was like really, you can hear how loud this palette is, was that it was really nice and pigmented. And as I started putting it on, I was like, I'm gonna wanna keep this. This is nice, this is easy to work with. But when I was blending a little bit, it just blends so unevenly. You can see how dark it is here and how like nothing it is there, and I'm just not feeling it. This one is a very similar color, but it blends out even more. That's the shade Carnival from the bottom. And even like trying to blend out here, I like swiped it into my crease because it's so powdery, it just like moves too easily. I did a little bit of Amaretto in the center. I wasn't crazy about this. I feel like it doesn't have enough presence. It doesn't have enough texture. It doesn't have enough base or sparkle or impact that, like, although it's a cute tone, it just doesn't do for me what I wanted it to. And then I was like, let me try to deepen this up with Terrace. And I feel like everywhere I was trying to put Terrace was just blending away the orange on both sides. And it was during this Terrace process that I was like, I don't think I can save this. I don't think this is worth being saved. I have other oranges that wouldn't give me a headache. I have other shimmers that would show up better. I have other browns that would do what I want them to do. So this look today is a fail. So I did this look with a lot of shades from the Escape Pod palette, and I feel like this is the first look that I've done that kind of like encapsulates what I think the vibe of the Escape Pod palette is supposed to be. I don't know if I love it, but I do like it. I'll tell you what I used. I used Lo-Fi on a fluffy brush on like the inner crease, and it was kind of nice that because the shade is so light, I like didn't have to worry about being precise. Because of that, I don't know, I guess you can kind of see it. But yeah, I was really just fluffing in there. And then I used Soiree on the inner part of my lid. I put Mardi Gras on the outer part of my lid. I used this blue exoplanet as like a little wing, and I do like how that little wing turned out. I don't think it has to be this shade to do it, but I think I will do this placement again. So after I laid those mattes down, I put Amaretto on the inner part of my lid, kind of layered over that lavender. I also ended up using Amaretto for my inner corner. I used Space Oasis over the rest of the lid. And then for my lower lash line, I pulled Exoplanet a little bit down. I put Flamingo by the inner part, and I put Cosmic Cabaret in the middle of it. These sparkles on my lid do give me the feeling of like, I can imagine someone who doesn't use indie single shadows really loving these, because they do give like a more special shimmer than shimmers you might get in Sephora from a lot of brands. They're definitely on the thinner side going on. It's really not my preference of like formula or look. I would rather it be like a little bit more amped up or shifty, like give me a little bit something more. But I can see why there's people that like this brand and why it has like the cult following that it does. Also, the shimmer that I have in the inner part down there, Cosmic Cabaret, I think that's the best shadow in this palette. It's a little bit more of like a thick metallic, not too thick, but just thick in the way that you feel the texture when you're picking it up. And I think it has a beautiful finish. I bet I have something else in my collection that could do that job, but I feel like if someone made me use this palette a ton of times, I can imagine myself just resigning to using Cosmic Cabaret all over the lid, deepening it up with the brown, and like calling it a day. And next, we're going to be talking about my dupe palette. Okay, so I assembled my dupe palette. I kind of allowed it to be a loosey-doopy, if you will. A loosity-doopity, if you won't. Here's the palette. There were a couple like minor adjustments that I allowed myself to make that I also think improve on the palette in my dupe version. For example, the two greens in the regular one, in the squeaky over here, are so similar, the two green shimmers. And in my palette, I chose the top green as a little bit more of like a vibrant, straightforward green, and then the bottom green is more shifty. It has a little bit more of a neutral base. They definitely give you different experiences in my palette, and I find in the Kaleidos, they give you the same exact experience. Also, the two oranges that are in the palette, I don't even own two orange single shadows that are so close because it's like basically the same thing. So mine are a little bit more different, and then this one can be used as like a crease shadow. This one's a little bit more of a vibrant orange. For this blue, I was looking for a specific one. I was looking for the one from Divina. I feel like it's called Ice Drop or something. I couldn't find it, so I just substituted it with this Dandelions Cosmetics one. It's fine. And also this in the regular palette is a little bit more of like an odd tone, like a little bit more yellowy perhaps. I don't think I even have a shade that tone, and I use this one that's like a little bit more neutral gray leaning. And then also this here in this palette is like mostly too light to be a transition. It's like right on the cusp of being too light. And the one that I included for this palette is actually something that I can use as a transition. So it's kind of like minor tweaks, mostly made out of necessity, but it'll also make this palette way better for me. We're gonna swatch out both palettes and like put them side by side and see how they compare, but I will say right off the bat, I'm so much more excited about this palette than I am about this thing over here. And it shows me that like I was on the right track of wanting the Kaleidos palette, but I should have done this a long, long time ago, because the reason I like the Kaleidos palette is because I have corresponding colors that I already like, you know? Okay, so I went ahead and swatched out the Kaleidos Escape Pod palette. It is interesting going through them all and like touching them, because the formula does feel so nice. I think I said that in like my first impression video, but the formula does feel so nice, but they don't all necessarily swatch as nice as like you would think they would by how soft the formula is. Like this blue here, I know blues are tough and it is hard to find blues that like swatch really well and work really easily, but like that's not it. And like these two shimmers are like so soft, they're like barely there. Yeah, I don't know. Swatches, not doing anything for me. So let's line them up with my palette, and maybe then we'll take the shadows that are most similar and construct looks with those. I want to do like one eye my shadows, one eye the Kaleidos shadows, and if we could do the colors that match up the most, then we're kind of comparing formulas, which might be fun. So for the first batch, we're going to have Jellyfish from Menagerie, Flighty from the Menagerie Flight Club palette, Petal from Glaminatrix, and Mesa from Luxie. Oh, it's funny, I thought I was doing this on like the good side so it'd be easy to swatch on the other side, but I did this from like my side, and now if I'm swatching it, Jellyfish, Flighty, Petal, Mesa. I definitely did have more fallout with my shades, but those all swatch really nicely, and I know I like to use them. Dandelions Cosmetics Winkle, Divina Pancake Bubbles, Terra Moon's Venus, Terra Moon's Lunar Lavender, Winkle, Pancake Bubbles, Venus, Lunar Lavender. Yeah, surprise, surprise. The single shade is still winning. Cleona Noble, Divina Orion, Terra Moon Space Case, ColourPop Chic Happens. Noble, Orion, Space Case, Chic Happens. It was funny, I was just kind of going on about the greens before, but I feel like the two greens they have kind of look more different than the two greens I picked. But I wouldn't say that's a flaw against the single shadows, because I definitely have other greens I could have picked. I thought I was doing something here. I still will stand, though, by the fact that, like, they have very different effects on the eye. Yeah, maybe I'll still just stand by that. Orion is just such, like, a bright, vibrant green shade with like nothing really else to it besides just like a lot of green, a lot of sparkle. And Space Case is just like a little bit like more mysterious, a little bit dirtier. It still has that bright green to it, but it's definitely like in a bed of dirt. ColourPop Wake Up Call, Orange Depotted from the Tarte Unleashed palette, ColourPop Noche. Wake Up Call, Depotted Tarte, Noche. Here is the entire dupe palette. You really see the difference between those two oranges there. These two like creamy colors right here don't look that different in the swatches, but I do know from use that they do come up very differently. I think for the shimmers, they actually are pretty good comparisons color-wise. It's just like the formulas are so different, and that's why I love my shadows and not the Kaleidos ones. Also, I know it's not coming up on camera, but Venus especially, and Space Case also, are so shifty, and their Kaleidos counterparts definitely aren't. Oh, you can kind of see it with Venus. You're not seeing like the green it goes to. Okay, so when it comes to what I can use, I think I'm gonna go for the hot pink, and then maybe one of these shades, because also these purples here are really similar. Yes, maybe like I have the option of those shimmers, and even maybe I'll include these two. I was talking about how mine's more gray and theirs is more yellow, but they do come off kind of similar in the swatches. So maybe I'll let that be my color story, and I'll see where it brings me. Okay, I'm gonna have this be the Kaleidos eye and this be the single shadow eye. I am gonna use the same brushes, but I will wipe them off in between as best as I can. If you hear squeaks from off camera, you know why. The escape pod has entered the chat. And my first thought was to do the brown on like my inner crease, but I think I want to switch it up and I'm gonna do the pink on my inner crease. Okay, this one, right off the bat, a lot of fallout, good pigment, but I don't know how like blendable it is. I'm already regretting my decision. I'm like, let me do something I don't normally do so I can hate it. All right, let's go into the Glaminatrix. Yeah, this one's a much different experience. This doesn't feel like this one kind of feels like paint going on. It kind of feels like thick and sludgy. This one feels like it would be easier to manipulate, and I feel like if I started with this one, I would have like the effect I was looking for. Okay, and then I'm gonna go in with the weird browns for the outer part. And this also, like, it's just so dark on the brush. Yeah, these just don't do what I want them to. Like, so many mattes, I feel like they kind of like fluff while you apply them, and these feel like paint to me. Paint with like a lot of fallout. I don't like the shape I created. I don't know what I've done here. I probably should have just done something that I like to do, but I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess, or whatever the saying is. Look at that. Look how nice those go together. Yeah, I feel like this side is way better. Makes more sense. And this is just like, what happened there? I'm tempted to kind of like carve this out a little bit. But my lids are pretty clear other than the fallout. Maybe I could just try to wipe off my lids a little bit. Okay, I did wipe them off a little bit. Did it help the cause? I don't think so. I'm gonna go in with Cosmic Cabaret for the Kaleidos side. I'm just gonna use my finger because that's how I generally like to apply shimmers. That looks nice. Noble for the single shadow side. I think that looks more nice, right? I don't know. They're both nice in their own way. I'll give him that. I think Noble is like a tad lighter. This one is looking a little interesting. It's looking a little bronzy, a little like warm purple in there too, so that's interesting. And then I think from there I'm going to go into Amaretto for the Kaleidos side, and then Venus for the single shadow side. Oh, beautiful. It's a beautiful shadow. I can't believe I thought and I hoped Amaretto would be like a beautiful shadow, and like I already have this sitting there in my collection, getting hardly used. It always like blows my mind when I notice things like that, because sometimes it's just like, it's so much easier to lust over what you don't have than to lust over what you already have. And this is an example where like, you know, I did the wrong thing. I purchased something that I'm not loving, I'm not getting use out of. But, you know, there has been other times that I've duped before I bought and it made me not buy. And I just need to let like all of this be a learning experience for me to like make sure I'm doing this next time. Cause yeah, like this eye looks so blah. This eye looks like this pink matte is just way too powerful to balance out the shimmers. But like this eye, I kind of get the vision. You know, I kind of like what's going on here. I'm just gonna clean this up and finish this eye look off, and I will be right back. And this is the finished look. I actually quite like the single shadow side. These are all colors that are very like comfortable to me. I feel like the mattes blend well into each other even though it's quite a bold placement. And I also feel like the shimmers on the lid have enough like to them to balance out the harshness of the mattes. On this side, we're not really experiencing any of those positives. I feel like the mattes from the Kaleidos palette are very pigmented, but they're hard to manipulate, they're hard to blend. And I think that shows in here that like it really stayed where I plopped it down, and it's hard to get any kind of like diffused line along the edges like I did with my single shadow side. And then the shimmers on the lid don't have enough to them to balance it out. And the look to me is just kind of like off center. Like it just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't hit the mark. But it's fun that I did both of these because I feel like if I just did this look with the Kaleidos palette, I might have just been like, oh, this is the look I don't like. But this proves to me I like this look. I just don't like it with the Kaleidos shadows. Off camera, I added more of the hot pink on the lower lash line. The Kaleidos side I did with the Kaleidos, the single shadow side I did with the Glaminatrix one. I added a little bit of the deeper purple, and then I added a little bit of the light shimmer to my inner corner on top of the pink. When we back up, this is like raccoon eyes going to the disco. I'm happy that I did this, although I don't think I'm going to be like keeping this palette together for a while or anything. It still kind of reminds me to look at my single shadows differently, and pulling out these like, especially these three shimmers right here, Venus, Lunar Lavender, and Noble. I'm really excited for these, and I definitely want to play with them on my eyes really soon. The fate of the Escape Pod palette is that it's going to sit in my collection until my single shadow declutter, and we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be doing a big declutter before the end of this month, so we'll discuss it further there, but I will say that often the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the boot. But that's going to be everything for today. If you enjoyed this, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and subscribe. It really means a lot to me, and there's always way more makeup content on the way. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.